Matthew is on that line for containment. Norfolk, Virginia. Matthew, what's your containment strategy?
Well, there is not one strategy that would enable us to deal with this North Korea issue. Military action gives Kim Jong-un the ability to retaliate and look strong. If you try to bully him, if you try to show him force, he's going to use that. He's going to turn around it on us and use anything that he can to try and provoke. They've been waiting. His grandfather was waiting for someone to react so that he could look strong. His father, once again, waiting for someone to react so that he could look strong. Military action, it's just going to provoke something that we can't get back from. Negotiations more than likely will not be followed. They won't follow anything that they agreed to initially just because we don't have the trust with them. He doesn't seem to be a man of what I would consider a man of honor and honoring his word. He's going to do what he wants to do.
996th meeting of the Security Council is called to order.
We'll leave this Washington Journal segment to go live now to New York to the UN Security Council. They're holding an emergency session to discuss the North Korea missile launch.
To pay tribute on behalf of the Council to His Excellency Ambassador Sasha Sergio Laurenti Solis, Permanent Representative of the Plurinational State of Bolivia, for his service as President of the Council for the month of June. I'm sure I speak for all members of the Council in expressing deep appreciation to Ambassador Laurenti Solis and his delegation for the great diplomatic skill with which they conducted the Council's business last month. The provisional agenda for this meeting is non-proliferation, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of the Republic of Korea to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Mr. Miroslav Yenca, Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Miroslav Yenca.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. President, members of the Security Council, according to the official news agency of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, and various governmental sources, at approximately 9 a.m. local time on 4 July 2017, the DPRK launched a ballistic missile which it termed, quote, test fire of intercontinental ballistic rocket Hwasong-14, end quote. The missile was launched near the Pangyon airfield in the northwest of the DPRK. According to the DPRK, it covered a distance of 933 kilometers during a 39-minute flight, reaching an altitude of 2,802 kilometers before impacting into the sea. According to these parameters, the missile would have a range of roughly 6,700 kilometers if launched on a more typical trajectory, making it an intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, according to widely used definitions. The DPRK again did not send pre-launch notifications to international organizations responsible for airspace and maritime safety. The official media claimed the DPRK was now, quote, a full-fledged nuclear power that has been possessed of the most powerful intercontinental ballistic rocket capable of hitting any part of the world along with nuclear weapons, end quote. This is the 7th time the Council has met to discuss the DPRK in 2017. Including today, 5 of these emergency consultations have followed the launch by the DPRK of ballistic missiles in open violation of Security Council resolutions. Mr. President, the Secretary General strongly condemns the launch of a ballistic missile of intercontinental range conducted by the DPRK. This action is yet another brazen violation of the relevant Security Council resolutions and constitutes a dangerous escalation of the situation. The DPRK leadership must cease further provocative actions and comply fully with its international obligations. The Secretary General underlines the importance of maintaining the unity of the international community in addressing this serious challenge. The DPRK must stop actions in violation of Security Council resolutions and allow space for the resumption of sincere dialogue. All parties must work to reopen communication channels, particularly military to military, to lower the risk of miscalculation or misunderstanding. Amidst the escalation of the security situation in the region, the United Nations and partners play a critical role in saving the lives of the most vulnerable people in the DPRK. As the Council considers its response, we again remind Member States of the importance of separating political and humanitarian concerns and urge them to support the life-saving activities carried out by the humanitarian organizations in the country. Mr. President, I would like to close by reiterating the Secretary General's commitment to seeking peaceful and political solutions. The United Nations will remain in close contact with all concerned parties and remains ready to assist in any way possible. Thank you.
感谢言夏先生
thank
所
Mr.
做的
Yensa
通
for
报
his。briefing.
我现在请
I
安理
now
会
give the
成员
floor
发
to
言，
those council members who wish to make
请美
statements.
国代表发
I
言。
give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. To my friends on the Security Council, I must say that today is a dark day. It is a dark day because yesterday's actions by North Korea made the world a more dangerous place. Their illegal missile launch was not only dangerous, but reckless and irresponsible. It showed that North Korea does not want to be part of a peaceful world. They have cast a dark shadow of conflict on all nations that strive for peace. Yesterday's act came from the same vicious dictator who sent a young college student back home to his parents, unresponsive and in a coma. For Americans, the true nature of the North Korean regime was painfully brought home with the images of 2 guards holding Otto Warmbier up as they transported him from a prison he should never have been in. Otto Warmbier is but one person out of millions who have been killed, tortured, or deprived of their human rights by the North Korean regime. To Americans, the death of one innocent person can be as powerful as the death of millions. Because all men and women are created in God's image, depravity toward one is a sure sign of willingness to do much more harm. The nature of the North Korean regime is clear. Only the scale of the damage it does could become different. That's why yesterday's escalation is so alarming. If North Korea will treat an innocent young student the way it treated Otto Warmbier, we should not be surprised if it acts barbarically on a larger scale. The United States does not seek conflict. In fact, we seek to avoid it. We seek only the peaceful denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and an end to the threatening actions by North Korea. Regrettably, we're witnessing just the opposite. Make no mistake, North Korea's launch of an ICBM is a clear and sharp military escalation. The North Korean regime openly states that its missiles are intended to deliver nuclear weapons to strike cities in the United States, South Korea, and Japan. And now it has greater capacity to do so. In truth, it is not only the United States and our allies that are threatened. North Korea's destabilizing escalation is a threat to all nations in the region and beyond. Their actions are quickly closing off the possibility of a diplomatic solution. The United States is prepared to use the full range of our capabilities to defend ourselves and our allies. One of our capabilities lies with our considerable military forces. We will use them if we must, but we prefer not to have to go in that direction. We have other methods of addressing those who threaten us and of addressing those who supply the threats. We have great capabilities in the area of trade. President Trump has spoken repeatedly about this. I spoke with him at length about it this morning. There are countries that are allowing, even encouraging, trade with North Korea in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. Such countries would also like to continue their trade arrangements with the United States. That's not going to happen. Our attitude on trade changes when countries do not take international security threats seriously. Before the path to a peaceful solution is entirely closed, however, there remains more that the international community can and must do, diplomatically and economically. In the coming days, we will bring before the Security Council a resolution that raises the international response in a way that is proportionate to North Korea's new escalation. I will not detail the resolution here today, but the options are all known to us. If we are unified, the international community can cut off the major sources of hard currency to the North Korean regime. We can restrict the flow of oil to their military and their weapons program. We can increase air and maritime restrictions. We can hold senior regime officials accountable. The international community has spoken frequently against the illegal and dangerous actions of the North Korean regime. For many years, there have been numerous UN sanctions against North Korea, but they have been insufficient to get them to change their destructive course. So in order to have an impact, in order to move North Korea off its military escalation, we must do more. We will not look exclusively at North Korea. We will look at any country that chooses to do business with this outlaw regime. We will not have patience for stalling or talking our way down to a watered-down resolution. Yesterday's ICBM escalation requires an escalated diplomatic and economic response. Time is short. Action is required. The world is on notice. If we act together, we can still prevent a catastrophe, and we can rid the world of a grave threat. If we fail to act in a serious way, there will be a different response. Much of the burden of enforcing UN sanctions rests with China. 90% of trade with North Korea is from China. We will work with China. We will work with any and every country that believes in peace. But we will not repeat the inadequate approaches of the past that have brought us to this dark day. We cannot forget the multiple missile tests this year or yesterday's escalation. We cannot forget Otto Warmbier and others North Korea continues to hold. We cannot forget the threats to our friends and allies around the world. We will not forget, and we will not delay. Thank you.
I
thank the representative of the United States. I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to begin by thanking the President for convening this urgent meeting jointly requested by the United States, the Republic of Korea, and Japan. I would also thank Mr. Gencha for the briefing. Mr. President, North Korea once again launched a ballistic missile in blatant violation of the relevant Security Council resolutions. This is totally unacceptable. Japan lodged a strong protest directly against North Korea immediately after the launch and condemned the act in the strongest terms. Here, I express once again our strong condemnation of this utterly unacceptable provocation. Japan demands that North Korea immediately cease all ballistic missile and nuclear development programs and provocations. Japan will never accept a nuclear-armed North Korea. The North Korean official media has announced that they successfully carried out the launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile. The missile reached the altitude of more than 2,500 kilometers, flew for about 40 minutes, and landed within the Japanese economic exclusive zone, approximately 300 kilometers off the Oga Peninsula. A number of Japanese fishing vessels were out in the sea at the time of the launch. This shows how dangerous and irresponsible this act by North Korea was. If it hadn't been such a lofted launch, the missile would have flown for more than 5,500 kilometers and could have reached many other member states' soil. These provocations of North Korea trample upon international efforts towards the peaceful resolution of nuclear and missile issues and present enormous global threat. As North Korea claims that they are capable of hitting any part of the world, their threat has literally become global. This most recent provocation made it even more evident that circumstances are not right for dialogue with North Korea at this moment. There is no other choice left for us now than to work together to increase pressure against North Korea. Thorough and faithful implementation of the relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions is critically important. Every member state must work together to pressure North Korea into taking concrete action toward denuclearization. We need to send a clear, united message that it is North Korea that needs to change, not our side. We must recall the Council's determination to take further significant measures in the event of a further DPRK nuclear test or launch. This launch requires a swift response from the Council in the form of a resolution with robust sanctions. Japan looks forward to working closely with Council members to this end. I thank you, Mr. President.
感谢日本代表的发言，请法国代表发言。
Monsieur le Président, permettez-moi de vous remercier, ainsi que les États-Unis et le Japon, pour la convocation de cette réunion très importante. Je remercie également le sous-secrétaire général aux affaires politiques, M. Yenka,
Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs, Mr. Yenka, for the very instructive statement he's just given us. President, yet again, the Security Council is meeting following a grave and unjustifiable violation by North Korea of its international obligations, amounting to a threat to international peace and security. With the ballistic missile launch 2 days ago, North Korea continues its reckless behavior in a most unexcusable manner. It is confirming its stubbornly proclaimed desire to flout the authority of the Security Council. It continues to ignore the numerous appeals and calls to reason, which together we've addressed to it. Finally, it persists in an irresponsible attitude, one of provocation, which brings us straight to an escalation. Sir, France condemned the missile launch, just as it did with the numerous ballistic missile launches carried out by Pyongyang over the past months. All action taken by North Korea simply fuel a dangerous pattern of instigation for regional stability and even international peace and security. Today, the countries of the region are under direct threat, and France reiterates its full solidarity to them. But make no mistake, everyone around this table is under threat. It is a global threat. The methodical and persistent approach has initiated at the highest levels of the regime in North Korea to develop its nuclear program speaks for itself. This new missile launch follows in the wake of previous ones, as well as nuclear testing in the past. It, today, is yet another step towards acquiring operational nuclear capacity. This is thus a meditated, unabashed assault of the non-proliferation regime. This regime is at the heart of our security system. This violation cannot be tolerated. Let there be no mistake. The North Korean nuclear program is one of the primary threats to the non-proliferation regime. This regime is something we've forged together, piece by piece, over the past decades. The non-proliferation regime itself is the backbone of the maintenance of international peace and security. It is our collective responsibility to protect this system. President, this reckless dash forward must be halted without precondition and immediately. Sanctions can never be automatic, nor are they an end in and of themselves. But when our messages, appeals, and even warnings are deliberately ignored over and over, systematically, a decisive collective response is necessary. Negotiation remains the priority, but the current situation doesn't allow for it at all. The deliberate, repeated, and out-and-out violation by whomsoever of our decisions cannot be subject to bargaining. It falls to North Korea to demonstrate in a sincere manner and through specific action that it stands ready to invest in a negotiated solution. Otherwise, we will have to be firm in our response.
Monsieur le Président,
Sir, with the threat of nuclear proliferation, that is indeed what is at stake. Weakness, lack of action are certainly not options. We've been brought together by a shared sense of urgency, as well as one of determination to ensure Security Council authority is upheld. We have to shoulder our responsibilities together. The entire international community must continue its efforts for the effective implementation of measures already adopted. But we must also reiterate our decisive commitment to halting the irresponsible action of North Korea. The end goal is full, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The clock is ticking. Our message must be firm, unambiguous. It should be the outcome of our meeting today. It is a significant step along these lines. Mr. President, France was in the forefront of the crafting of the non-proliferation regime and intends to stay there. In the Security Council, as well as in the European Union, France has always taken determined and forceful action against any attempt to undermine the regime. My country contributed to building consensus with partners to ensure that a firm response be provided. I'd like to reassure you today that my country will continue to do this in the most resolute manner possible. This is why we work with all our partners for the adoption of a Security Council resolution, including the adoption of new, robust, and operational measures. We also intend to continue similar measures within the European Union. Sir, when the very foundations of our collective security system are rocked, there's really no room for going backwards and forwards. Given the risk of this situation worsening, the Council must and will shoulder its responsibilities. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. Like the previous speakers from the United States, Japan, and France, the United Kingdom condemns in the strongest terms the DPRK's flagrant violation of unanimous decisions of the Security Council. Despite our repeated condemnation and despite successive Security Council resolutions, the leadership of the DPRK has persisted in pursuing its illegal programs in misguided pursuit of a nuclear weapons capability. This is simply not acceptable. We have seen an unprecedented number of ballistic missile tests over the past year, including ground testing. However, with this launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile, the Council should note that the DPRK clearly intends to threaten directly an ever greater number of states, and indirectly, the whole world. All such ballistic missile activity by the DPRK is in violation of binding Security Council resolutions, and any capability that the DPRK develops to threaten the security of other states is of grave concern. Our response must be strong and clear. The international community must redouble our efforts. As the United Kingdom Foreign Secretary has said, North Korea strains every nerve and sinew to build nuclear weapons and launch illegal missiles, even as the people of North Korea endure starvation and poverty. Amidst reports of widespread hardship and human rights violations in DPRK, Pyongyang's priority should be the health and welfare of North Korean people, not continuation of the nuclear program. We continue to urge the DPRK to return to credible and authentic multilateral talks on its nuclear and ballistic missile programs and to abide by its obligations under UN Security Council resolutions. The United Kingdom has today summoned the DPRK's ambassador in London, conveying in the strongest terms our views of this reckless behaviour. We will also be redoubling our efforts with partners to seek strong enforcement of the measures that aim to bring the DPRK to the right path. Increased vigilance is needed. We will continue to encourage partners globally to take effective action to understand and, when necessary, disrupt the DPRK's illegal proliferation and other sanctions evasion activity. And we will also work with allies and partners around the world to consider the fullest range of measures to increase diplomatic pressure. The primary responsibility lies with the DPRK, but all members of the international community must further strengthen their resolve to enforce existing measures, fully and effectively, without delay. We also urge all states to comply with the Security Council's requirements for reporting on implementation of measures. But as the DPRK's own statements of defiance make clear, even these steps will probably not be enough. Faced with these provocations, we must toughen our resolve. The United Kingdom supports new binding measures to raise the cost further for these illegal actions. The Security Council should start work immediately on a new Security Council resolution to achieve this. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom. I now give the floor to the representative of Sweden.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you to Japan, United States, and the Republic of Korea for convening and asking for this meeting this afternoon. Mr. President, the missile test yesterday of possible intercontinental range illustrates the DPRK's determination to continue the development of its ballistic missile and nuclear weapons program. This is a cause of great concern for the region and indeed for the world. Sweden condemns the latest test in the strongest possible terms. We once again call on the DPRK to cease all development of its ballistic missile and nuclear weapons programs and to take immediate steps towards the program's complete, verifiable, and irreversible dismantlement in accordance with relevant Security Council resolutions. The continued unity of this Security Council in the face of the DPRK's blatant violations of this Council's resolutions is of utmost importance, as is the effective implementation of relevant Council resolutions by all countries. Implementation of the sanctions against the DPRK remains insufficient and highly inconsistent. We reiterate that all UN member states must do their utmost in this regard. Mr. President, there's no military solution to the situation on the Korean Peninsula. There is an urgent need for redoubled efforts to build confidence, avoid further escalation, and take steps to prepare for a peaceful, diplomatic, and comprehensive solution to the situation on the peninsula and for the wider region. All must contribute to this end, and we welcome all initiatives to facilitate a peaceful and comprehensive solution through dialogue. Tensions have risen in recent months, and the potential for mistakes, misunderstanding, and miscalculation is high. A regional security mechanism should be the medium-term goal. We remain fully committed to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We reiterate our solidarity with the neighboring countries and their peoples who are living under the constant shadow of the DPRK's threatening behavior. We again call on the DPRK to re-engage in a credible and meaningful dialogue with the international community. In the meantime, Sweden will stand united with Council members in condemning any action that jeopardizes international peace and security. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Sweden for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Egypt.
Mr. President, at the outset, I would like to thank Mr. Yenka for his technical and useful briefing. We stress once again that the current situation on the Korean Peninsula continues to be one of the main challenges to the nuclear non-proliferation regime. Egypt expresses its great concern at the continued escalation and tension on the Korean Peninsula as a result of the DPRK nuclear program, which represents one of the main sources of threat to international peace and security. We call once again on the DPRK to comply fully with all its commitments according to relevant Security Council resolutions, to eliminate all its nuclear arsenal, and to rejoin the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty as a non-nuclear state without delay and without any conditions. Egypt is fully committed to make every possible effort at the national level to implement all Security Council sanctions on the DPRK. Mr. President, Egypt supports fully all efforts aimed at reaching a peaceful solution to the DPRK nuclear program issue, to achieve a durable peace on the Korean Peninsula, including all reunification efforts, especially in light of the special and historic relations between Egypt and the countries of the region. Egypt calls on the international community and the Security Council to deal in a comprehensive manner and without selectivity with all challenges facing the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in order to preserve the credibility and the effectiveness of the non-proliferation regime and relevant Security Council resolutions. This is important, especially in light of the continued erosion in the credibility of this regime, which represents the main pillar in the broader international security architecture. Such an erosion is the result of the non-universality of the treaty and the double standards applied when dealing with the challenges facing the treaty. Mr. President, in closing, my country encourages all parties to exercise self-restraint and to resume discussions aimed at reaching a peaceful settlement as soon as possible. We take note of some of the positive proposals made by China in order to achieve a gradual détente. In this regard, we urge once again the DPRK to cooperate with all dialogue efforts and to cease any measures that may lead to further escalation and tension. We call on all international parties to provide the necessary conditions to reach a mutually agreed settlement that guarantees regional and international peace and security in line with the purposes and principles of the United Nations and the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Egypt stands ready to make every possible effort to support a peaceful settlement to this crisis in a manner that would preserve regional and international peace and security. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Egypt for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Italy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Italy condemns in the strongest terms the latest missile test conducted by the DPRK. This latest provocation confirms once again that the North Korean regime continues to pursue its nuclear and ballistic missile programs in flagrant violation of the Security Council resolutions and therefore in open defiance of the international community. The last launch, having an intercontinental range, is particularly worrisome. Equally worrisome is the fact that the DPRK claimed to have reached its objective of acquiring intercontinental ballistic missile capacity. The advancement of missile and nuclear capabilities by the DPRK is undermining our collective security. The DPRK's escalation and destabilizing activities pose a clear, serious, and growing threat to international security and the global non-proliferation regime. We call on the DPRK to take immediate steps to abandon its provocative, illegal, and self-isolating policies, putting a verifiable and irreversible stop to its missile and nuclear programs, and embark on a different path. This objective continues to require a concerted multilateral effort to maintain a high level of pressure by the international community on the North Korean regime. In this context, Italy stands ready to work with all relevant stakeholders and members of the Council in order to devise additional and significant restrictive measures. In this endeavor, maintaining the Security Council unity of purpose, we must also not forget that the civilian population of the DPRK continues to be highly vulnerable as a consequence of the regime's policies. We must therefore ensure, as we did in the past, that new restrictive measures do not have any negative unintended consequences for the humanitarian situation in the country. The ultimate objective of our pressure must continue to be a change of behavior by the DPRK, framing a path towards the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and the achievement of a peaceful and comprehensive diplomatic solution through dialogue. Mr. President, full and effective implementation of relevant Security Council resolutions by the whole UN membership continues to be Italy's priority as chair of the 1718 Committee. Maintaining an open channel of dialogue with member states, specifically through regional outreach meetings, is proving to be an effective way to engage the membership and facilitate national efforts to enforce the sanctions regime which is in place. In this respect, I want to point out that the rate of submission of national implementation reports has steadily increased. As of today, the committee has received 94 national implementation reports on Resolution 2270 and 70 on Resolution 2321. Moreover, all national reports under Resolution 2321, the latest adopted, were received in the last 4 months, showing a higher submission rate than under previous resolutions regarding the DPRK. While encouraging, this is still not sufficient. Let me therefore, as chair of the Sanctions Committee, make an urgent appeal to all member states to continue to provide the necessary attention to this urgent matter. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Italy for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Senegal.
Thank you, President. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the U.S. and Japanese delegations for having called for the holding of this emergency meeting. I would also like to thank you, sir, for having accepted this request. I'd also like to thank the Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs, who's given us a factual and clear briefing. President, in very appropriate terms, you've expressed our words of thanks on behalf of the Security Council members as a whole, including, of course, my delegation, to the plurinational state of Bolivia. Thanks for the high quality and outstanding presidency of the Security Council for the past month. I thus endorse the statements made by you. Sir, it's telling that the first formal meeting of your presidency is on yet another act of defiance to the international community, in particular to the Security Council. I'm talking, of course, about the launch by the DPRK of an intercontinental ballistic missile yesterday, on 4 July, at a time when, with our American friends, we were celebrating the holiday in the United States. My delegation condemns in the most firmest terms yet another launch by the DPRK of an ICBM, which landed in the Sea of Japan. Without a doubt, this is a game changer because it demonstrates that North Korea, after methodically continuing its nuclear and missile programs today, is more determined than ever to acquire a nuclear deterrent power. As Mr. Yencha has stated, this launch comes after previous ones from Pyongyang, which we've all condemned in this room. It is a threat not only to the people of the region, but also is a hard blow to the non-proliferation regime, with a claimed intention of developing a nuclear weapon, thus significantly fanning the flames of tension in the region and beyond. It is a grave threat to maritime and air security, as there was no notification nor warning regarding the launch. This is a densely populated region with one of the most traveled airspaces of the world. Yet again, the Security Council's credibility has been called into question. Indeed, in spite of all sanctions and measures taken against it, the DPRK has hardly abandoned its nuclear ambitions. It has gone as far as questioning the Security Council's credibility regarding its illegal nuclear program. In this manner, it has continued to flout Security Council resolutions and appeals, meaning that the Council must take action. We've made continued appeals to the DPRK to come back to dialogue and to renounce provocation. Sanctions could go hand in hand with dialogue in a discreet manner, as mentioned by the various resolutions on the country. By way of conclusion, and since there's no military solution to the problem on the Korean Peninsula, my country would like to reiterate the importance of the maintenance of peace and security in this region. We call for a comprehensive, peaceful, diplomatic, and political solution to be found. It is in this spirit that my delegation intends to work with other Council members on the drafting of a resolution regarding additional measures that would be appropriate to take. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Senegal for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the United States, Japan, and the Republic of Korea for initiating the Council's urgent briefing on the recent North Korean missile launch, and the Presidency for promptly convening it. I also thank Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Janša for his briefing on this alarming issue. Indeed, the beginning of 2017 has already become another unprecedented period in terms of the North Korean destabilizing and unlawful actions. Recent intercontinental ballistic missile launch on the 4th of July contributes enormously to the growing nuclear threat in the region. Despite immense political and diplomatic efforts to halt the North Korean WMD programs, we have seen no signs whatsoever of DPRK's intention to change its behavior. The North Korean irresponsible policy has already seriously undermined the non-proliferation regime as a whole. The current developments on the Korean Peninsula raise three rhetorical but also principal questions. Does Pyongyang hear signals from the Security Council? Are the signals strong and clear enough? How much time is left before a North Korean ICBM is equipped with a nuclear warhead and successfully deployed? Needless to say, the Council should use every instrument at its disposal to ensure full implementation of its decisions. At the same time, we cannot but recognize that the existing sanctions regime appears to be inefficient in preventing DPRK from acquiring technologies, materials, equipment, and financial resources for further development of its nuclear program. I wish to recall Ukraine's previously stated position that the Council should find ways to increase international pressure on the North Korean regime to respond to its reckless behavior, which continues unabated. We do believe that only robust decisions and steps by the Council could put an end to the systematic and brutal violations of international law and eliminate growing nuclear threat on the continent. We also fully share the necessity of further fostering neighboring states' defense capabilities against this threat. We cannot wait until next nuclear test or missile launch. Challenges related to the DPRK nuclear and missile ambitions should be addressed collectively, decisively, and without any further delay. We should not allow Pyongyang to continue discrediting the role of the Security Council in the context of global non-proliferation efforts. Ukraine remains ready for constructive work with all delegations on this issue, including on a new resolution with more robust and operational measures, to ensure positive changes in the current situation and move closer to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Ukraine for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Uruguay.
Thank you very much, President. We would also like to convey our thanks to the delegations of the United States, Japan, and the Republic of Korea for having convened this meeting. Thanks also go to the ASG for Political Affairs for his briefing. And thanks first and foremost to you, President, not only for the way in which you reacted very quickly to the request from the United States, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, but also for holding this in open format, open to the participation of all the membership who can listen to our discussions and thus ensuring transparency. I think it is worth us all expressing our view on this very serious issue before the entire membership of this House. We condemn in the strongest possible terms the recent launch of a ballistic missile, allegedly intercontinental in range, carried out by North Korea. We call once again upon North Korea to abandon its existing nuclear programs completely, verifiably and irreversibly, and to immediately halt all related activities, including launches using ballistic missile technology and other provocative acts. North Korea's bombastic posturing is a threat to international peace and security and constitutes a blatant violation of the myriad resolutions of the Security Council. North Korea must respect all those resolutions adopted by this body and give up its nuclear pretensions. Such a step would contribute to fostering peace in the Korean Peninsula and would help to pave the way to a resumption of dialogue with the overarching goal of achieving the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. President, the threat of use or the actual use of nuclear weapons constitutes a crime against humanity and a major violation of international law, including international humanitarian law, as well as a violation of the Charter of the United Nations. The sole guarantee against the use or threat of use of these weapons is their express prohibition and their total elimination. Whilst we are sat here in this room contending with the obstinate conduct of North Korea in terms of nuclear weapon proliferation, the wider membership of the United Nations is giving its all and racing against the clock to be able to adopt this coming Friday, we hope, a treaty to ban nuclear weapons. Regrettably, neither North Korea nor the nuclear powers are participating in this negotiation. There are other states that are also not taking place. The aim is to achieve a more secure and safer world, and a world free of the effects of these lethal weapons. This must be seen as the goal and responsibility to be borne equally by all those gathered here today to guarantee the security and indeed the very survival of humanity. The North Korea's ongoing defiance and an inability to find a peaceful solution to this situation simply serves to ramp up the tensions in the Korean Peninsula and might inflame the situation further with serious consequences. In order to change the situation and to make headway, there is a need to correctly and fully implement the sanctions regime, a responsibility borne by all member states of this House. Uruguay underscores the need to seek out new options for action, including new approaches and new negotiating modalities to resolve the situation, which gets worse and worse with each passing month. The Security Council must find a workable course of action to put an end to the endless round of provocations and violations by North Korea, and to usher in resumption of the dialogue for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Uruguay reiterates its call for dialogue to take place, as we see no other viable solution to the North Korean question than that of face-to-face negotiation and political determination to be shared by both parties. Uruguay urges the members of the Security Council to come together as one on this particular issue. We must hold firm to our commitment to find a peaceful diplomatic and political solution, paving the way for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. At times of great tension, cool heads must prevail. We must refrain from taking unilateral action and pour all our energies into solving this problem. Thank you very much, President.
I thank the representative of Uruguay. I now give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We'd like to thank the Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Miloslav Yenchich, for his briefing regarding the DPRK launch of a ballistic missile. The situation requires thorough clarification and investigation. If Since there has been a ballistic missile registered, it showed up on the Russian system of warning of rocket launches. According to information from the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, based on an objective and technology-based monitoring of the situation, it has been established that the parameters and data regarding the target of the missile are in line with the tactical criteria of mid-range ballistic missiles. We are carefully following the development of the situation on the Korean Peninsula. We'd like to call your attention to the joint Russia and Chinese statement about this issue, made in Moscow on 4 July. This was immediately following the missile launch. We find this action from the DPRK to be inadmissible and to be running counter to relevant Security Council resolutions. Russia and China have urged the DPRK to firmly comply with the provisions of said resolutions. We share the concern regarding the evolving situation in the Korean Peninsula. An escalation of military and political tensions on the peninsula fraught with the risk of an armed conflict. They mean that the international community must take collective measures for a peaceful settlement of the solution through dialogue and consultation. We are against any statements or action which could lead to an escalation and hardening of antagonisms. We call for all interested states to act with restraint rather than provocation and warmongering, demonstrate a readiness to engage in dialogue without preconditions, as well as make active efforts to de-escalate tensions. The Russian Federation and China put forth a joint initiative. It is based on the Chinese proposal of a dual suspension and parallel progress for the denuclearization of DPRK, as well as establishing a peace mechanism on the peninsula. Also, the Russian phased plan for settlement to the conflict. We call upon the DPRK as a voluntary political decision to declare a moratorium on the testing of nuclear explosive devices and the testing of ballistic missiles. Though the U.S. and the Korean Republic at the same time should refrain from conducting full-scale joint training exercises. In parallel, there could be talks held where general principles for relations would be affirmed, including the non-use of force, not using aggression, ensuring peaceful coexistence, as well as efforts for the denuclearization of the DPRK, for a comprehensive settlement to all issues, and this includes the nuclear one. All interested parties in the negotiations process, in their chosen format, could deal with creating in the DPRK and Northeast Asia peace and security mechanisms. This would lead to the normalization of relations between relevant states. We call upon all states to support said initiative, which offers a true window of opportunity for resolving the issue in the Korean Peninsula. We reaffirm our strong commitment to the international regime of the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons and intention to see the denuclearization of the DPRK as well as comprehensive and full implementation of relevant resolutions of the Security Council. We express our intention with other interested states to continue efforts to ensure that through dialogue and consultations, there is a balanced addressing of all existing concerns. We call upon all sides to strictly comply with obligations set forth in the joint statement from 19 September 2005, a swift relaunch of dialogue for a comprehensive solution to the issue of the Korean Peninsula. The possibility of taking military measures to resolve the problems of the Korean Peninsula should be excluded. We express our support to the idea of North and South Korea engaging in dialogue and consultations, demonstrate goodwill, improve relations, carry out cooperation for a peaceful solution, and play their due and accountable role in de-escalating the situation on the Korean Peninsula and resolving all pending issues. We pay due attention to the support or striking of international and regional balance and stability. Allow me to stress, alliances between certain states should never be made to the detriment of the interests of third parties. We're against a military presence from extra-regional forces in Northeast Asia, and the deployment under a pretext of countering and deployment of certain systems under a pretext of countering the military and missile program of the DPRK. The deployment of a THAAD system in Northeast Asia is a serious hit to the strategic stability of the region, including for Russia and China, and certainly doesn't serve to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula based on the principle of ensuring peace and stability in the region. We are against the deployment of said systems and call upon relevant sides to swiftly halt and cancel the deployment process. All measures should be taken to ensure and protect the interests of the two countries in security, but also strike strategic balance in the region. It is of utmost importance for us, or rather it is utterly clear for us that any attempts to justify a military solution are inadmissible. They lead to unpredictable consequences for the region. In the very same manner, attempts to economically strangle North Korea are equally unacceptable, as millions of people are in great humanitarian need. The UN plays its role here. There must be a depolitization of humanitarian efforts. In summary, sir, all must acknowledge that sanctions will not resolve the issue. In that manner, we simply rush towards a stalemate, just as any attempts to resolve the situation through force are inadmissible. We need to take into account DPRK's concerns for security. At this time, it is important to leave behind the dangerous logic of confrontation and together seek a solution on the basis of a comprehensive political solution to the DPRK issues, including the matter of the DPRK's nuclear and missile programs. Here, China's proposal for the dual suspension and parallel progress, as well as the Russian roadmap for a DPRK solution, including the gradual establishment of a peace mechanism for the region and denuclearization of the DPRK, we think is an appropriate launchpad for such talks. We call upon all to participate in this work. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. Now, give the floor to Representative of Bolivia.
Thank you very much, President. We would like to thank the Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs, Mr. Miroslav Jenka, for the information he shared with us in his briefing about the most recent events which led to the convening of this afternoon's urgent meeting. Bolivia would like to once again express in the strongest possible terms its condemnation of the launch of ballistic missiles and the nuclear program pursued by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or the DPRK. That includes the launch yesterday on the 4th of July. We call upon this country, the DPRK, to abandon its nuclear program and to abandon its ballistic missile program in a complete, verifiable and irreversible way. We urge all parties to this conflict and all stakeholders to take steps to refrain from escalating the tensions in the country and to avoid fanning the flames in the peninsula, which would pose a risk to international peace and security, but most particularly particularly would pose such a risk in said Korean peninsula. In particular, we call upon all the parties to refrain from any act of provocation, to refrain from taking unilateral steps, and to refrain from taking measures that fall outside international law and that run counter to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. We hail initiatives such as the dual suspension suggestion, which is one that we fully back. The suspension for suspension initiative or dual suspension initiative would see the suspension of North Korea's nuclear activities with a quid pro quo of the suspension of military exercises by the Republic of Korea in the United States of America. We call for an understanding that there can be no military solution to this conflict and there must be an end to threats of use of force. Rather, people must sit down once again around the negotiating table for dialogue to find a political and diplomatic solution with the overarching goal of achieving the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Thank you very much, President.
I thank the representative of Bolivia for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would also like to thank the delegation of the United States, Japan, and the Republic of Korea. I would also like to thank ASG Yenka for his briefing. Mr. President, we join others in strongly condemning the latest launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile by the Democratic Republic of Korea in violation of various Security Council resolutions. We concur with the Secretary General that this constitutes, and I quote, a dangerous escalation of the situation, unquote, threatening regional peace and security in the Korean Peninsula. It is absolutely important that the DPRK seize these provocative actions to reduce the tension in the Korean Peninsula and prevent the further escalation of the situation. We would like to once again underscore the need for finding a lasting, comprehensive political and diplomatic solution through dialogue and negotiation. This requires that the DPRK returns to its international commitments on denuclearization and fully comply with relevant resolution of the Security Council. It is important that we maintain the unity of the Council and speak with one voice in addressing this issue, which is becoming extremely dangerous. One thing makes us not lose hope. While there might be differences on method and approach concerning the substances relating to denuclearization of DPRK, there are none. This should never be understated. Finally, the latest launch of ballistic missile by the DPRK is a reminder to all of us that the full implementation of the Council's resolution by all member states is much more critical now, more than ever before. I would like to reaffirm the commitment of Ethiopia to continue to work towards the full implementation of this Security Council resolution. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ethiopia for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Kazakhstan.
Mr. President, first of all, let me thank Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Yencha for his report, as well as US and Japan for calling those consultations on yet another flagrant violation by DPRK. Kazakhstan strongly condemns irresponsible and dangerous North Korea's launch of ballistic missile of possible intercontinental range that undermine our common international efforts to strengthen regional and ultimately international peace and security. Today, once again, we see how the North Korean regime continues developing its nuclear missile potential, and we observe its steady progress in this direction. This only causes serious concern. The expansion of nuclear powers club is totally unacceptable for the wider international community. Therefore, Pyongyang must pursue a contrary approach to the stance it is taking. It is our urgent and common task to make North Korea to comply with the international will. All Council members are united in comprehending the full seriousness and complexity of the situation in North Korea. Let us use this unity to develop a comprehensive and balanced approach to create conditions for non-military solutions while maintaining the sanctions regime forcing DPRK to dialogue. In this regard, Kazakhstan once again calls upon North Korea to follow its positive example of willingly abandoning nuclear tests and weapons to live in peace and harmony with the entire world. We stand ready to share our own experience with Pyongyang in this field if needed. In conclusion, Kazakhstan is ready to support any initiative leading to a diplomatic and peaceful solution of the crisis on the Korean Peninsula. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Kazakhstan. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of China. I thank ASG Yentze for his briefing. Relevant Security Council resolutions contain explicit provisions against any launches by the DPRK using ballistic missile technology. The launching of a ballistic missile by the DPRK on July 4th was a flagrant violation of the relevant Council resolutions and the flaunting of the will of the entire international community. China finds this launching unacceptable. We strongly urge the DPRK to strictly abide by the resolutions of the Security Council and put a stop to any rhetoric and action that might further exacerbate the tension on the peninsula. At the same time, we call on all the parties concerned to exercise restraint, avoid provocative actions and belligerent rhetoric, demonstrate the will for unconditional dialogue, and work actively together to defuse the tension. On July the 4th, the heads of state of China and Russia exchanged views on the situation on the Korean Peninsula and agreed that the nuclear issue of the Korean Peninsula should be resolved through dialogue and consultation. The foreign ministries of our two countries issued a joint statement which expressed the common position and concern of China and Russia regarding the issue of the Korean Peninsula. The joint statement put forward the joint initiative of our two countries based on China's dual-track approach and a suspension for suspension proposal and Russia's step-by-step plan. The current situation on the peninsula is complex and sensitive, and the dialogue process is in a standstill. The China-Russia joint initiative is aimed at addressing both the symptoms and the root causes and taking integrated measures to strive for a solution. It is objective, fair, reasonable, and feasible. We hope that it will get the support of the international community and help open a realistic route towards the resolution of the problem of the Korean Peninsula. China has always insisted on realizing the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, maintaining peace and stability on the peninsula, and seeking a solution through dialogue and consultation. China has always been firmly opposed to chaos and conflict on the peninsula. Military means must not be an option in this regard. The deployment of THAAD anti-missile system in Northeast Asia seriously undermines the strategic security interests of regional countries, including China. As such, it is not conducive to the realization of the denuclearization of the peninsula and the regional peace and stability. China urges the countries concerned to halt and cancel its deployment immediately. Denuclearization of and a lasting peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula are in the interests of all parties. We hope that the parties concerned will work together with China, play their due role, and shoulder their due responsibility, with a view to returning the issue of the Korean Peninsula to the right track of peaceful dialogue at an early date. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank the Chinese presidency for convening today's meeting. My delegation is grateful for this opportunity to participate in this emergency meeting to address the serious and urgent issue of the DPRK's launch of a ballistic missile of intercontinental class range on the 3rd of July. It is deeply regrettable that the DPRK responded with yet another even more serious provocation to the repeated message from the new government in Seoul under the leadership of President Moon Jae-in, emphasizing the need for peaceful resolution of the issue and its willingness to engage in dialogue under the right circumstances. It is also a source of our profound disappointment that the DPRK once again has chosen the wrong path by test-firing another long-range ballistic missile just a few days after the ROK-US summit meeting in Washington on the June 30th, 2017, during which the two leaders called upon the DPRK to refrain from provocative, destabilizing actions and rhetoric, and to make a strategic choice to fulfill its international obligations and commitments. The Republic of Korea condemns in the strongest terms the DPRK's latest provocation as a flagrant violation of relevant Security Council resolutions. We urge the DPRK to no longer test the unwavering resolve of the government of the Republic of Korea as well as international community to achieve denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. The DPRK's repeated provocations in defiance of multiple Security Council resolutions will only strengthen the resolve of the international community and be met with a more resolute response. Pyongyang must realize that its obsessive pursuit of nuclear and missile provocation programs and continued provocations will only serve to worsen its diplomatic isolation and deepen its economic plight. Mr. President, given the urgency and gravity of this issue, we, the international community, must once again demonstrate our strong resolve not to tolerate the DPRK's nuclear and ballistic missile programs, which have become a global threat that requires global action. In this regard, I'd like to refer to the Security Council's previously expressed determination that it will take further significant measures in the event of a further DPRK nuclear test or missile launch. Indeed, we must take stronger measures, including a new Security Council sanctions resolution to stop the DPRK's provocations. At the same time, the need for swift, full, and thorough implementation of the sanctions resolutions cannot be overemphasized as an effective tool to bring the DPRK back to credible negotiations for denuclearization. This is the last opportunity for the DPRK to chart a new beginning in inter-Korean relations as well as in its relations with the international community. The DPRK must renounce its nuclear brinkmanship and step back from the point of no return. Pyongyang should awaken from its delusion that nuclear and ballistic missile development can ensure its security and instead resolve to choose the path toward denuclearization. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement. The representative of the U.S. has requested for a further statement. I now give her the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I do want to thank you for holding this meeting in the public and allowing us all to voice our concerns. I first wanted to tell my Russian friends that not only has the Secretary General said this was an ICBM, and the U.S. has said this is an ICBM, North Korea has said this is an ICBM. So if you need any sort of intelligence to let you know that the rest of the world sees this as ICBM, I'm happy to provide it. Secondly, in reference to being opposed to sanctions on North Korea, this council all knows we have done repeated resolutions and nothing has happened. If you are happy with North Korea's actions, veto it. If you want to be a friend to North Korea, veto it. But if you see this as a threat, if you see this for what it is, which is North Korea showing its muscle, then you need to stand strong and vote with the international community to strengthen sanctions on North Korea. And if you choose not to, we will go our own path. But it makes no sense to not join together on this threat against North Korea. They have not had any care for Russia or China in this. They have not listened to anything that you've said. They're not going to listen to anything that you say. And so it's time that we all stand together and say we will not put up with this action. To sit there and oppose sanctions or to sit there and go in defiance of a new resolution means you're holding the hands of Kim Jong-un. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the U.S. for her statement. The representative of the Russian Federation has requested for further statement.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank my colleague from the U.S., Ambassador Haley. We too are proposing to work together. The point of my statement was that a solution to the situation on the Korean Peninsula we think can only be found exclusively through calibrating regional and international efforts. The resolution clearly sets forth that not just sanctions, but first and foremost, work on a political track must be done for a solution to the situation. This is the goal. Sanctions cannot be a cure-all, and this has been demonstrated by history. So here, what we need is to seek a political solution and be creative in our diplomacy. We've proposed, as I said in my statement, work collectively. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
President Trump tweets today, trade between China and North Korea grew almost 40% in the first quarter. So much for China working with us, but we had to give it a try. The Chicago Tribune writes that President Trump chastised China in the tweet, as his administration is finding that some of the most obvious tools to increase pressure on North Korea have already been tried and failed. As he flew to Poland on Air Force One today, Mr. Trump spoke by phone about the North Korean threat with Egyptian President al-Sisi, emphasizing the need for countries to implement UN Security Council resolutions.